Welcome to Transcending Comics, a podcast dedicated to trans representation in comic books, manga, and webtoons, both on panel and behind the scenes. I'm your host, Tomi, and joining me today is someone I'm excited to finally have on the show. They're the creator behind my favorite YouTube channel as of late, Amdrag. They also have a history of creating comics, drawing their own trading cards, and even working in the music industry. Their recent video, These Stories Change You, brought their channel into the realm of trans comics, or specifically manga, and that's exactly what we're here to discuss today. With no further ado, I'd like to welcome to the channel my good friend and favorite YouTuber, Des Fox.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm really stoked to be here. I love your podcast. This is so much fun.
Yeah, glad I could finally have you on. And I was pretty ecstatic last week when I'm like, wait, you talk about spiritual stuff, and that's my jam. But now you're also talking about queer comics. That's even more my jam. Hell yeah. Let's get you on the show.
We finally crossed the streams. I'm glad. It was inevitable, but here we are.
Do you want to tell the folks a little bit about your channel? Because there's not really another one I can compare it to that I don't feel like would diminish it in some way, because I like you so much better than the I like yours more than most of these spiritual adjacent philosophy based YouTube videos.
Well, thank you so much. That's super kind of you. So my channel is called Amdrag, and that is short for American Drag. And the whole concept about it is to try and create a very perennial spiritual space on YouTube. Kind of as a reaction to feeling like a lot of the spiritual YouTube channels and a lot of the other spaces kind of embracing metaphysics and hermetics in particular tend to be kind of I don't know, they felt a little bit isolationist, a little bit right-leaning, and a little bit exclusionary. And I wanted to create a space for people like me, which is to say people who find themselves on the outside of society, but full of compassion. So my goal was to create a dedicated space discussing perennial spiritual ideas with an emphasis on Hermetic philosophy. And so my content tends to be, I think you once compared it to an AMV, which I think is really natural because I used to do that. That's actually probably where all this, my instinctual video editing comes from, is the early 2000s Trigun and Cowboy Bebop AMV space. And, I've always really absorbed media wholly and completely. I really love being moved to tears by media, especially by things you don't expect to. And I wanted to bring that to my viewers and show them the things that touch my heart that you might not expect to. So really, I'm out there just trying to make unique video collages, sharing my own personal poems and essays in regards to esoteric and spiritual matters, paired up with meaningful and moving media. So it was very natural that eventually I got over here to comic books and manga because I am just so in love with the format. So it's very exciting to be able to discuss that with somebody of a like mind.
And for those that haven't seen Des's videos in the past, the AMV comparison is perfect. Like, imagine for a spiritual video, if instead of someone who's speaking in riddles and pretending to know more about your life than you do, it's just beautiful visual poetry with everything you loved about old AMVs, wonderful clips pulled in, nice music backtrack in the background. And yeah, it's just perfect. I've not found another channel that does exactly what you do. And it's always very digestible, usually under like 10 minutes. So yeah, check them out. I do know that because of the nature of drag and America, and this being a conglomeration of both words of American drag, it can be hard to find your channel. So for those that want to look them up ahead of time, go ahead and look up Amdrag, Losing Friends in Spiritual Isolation. That was their first video I found, and it's still one of my favorites. Des, is there another one you like to start people off with?
It's always hard to say because I think every YouTuber faces this, where they make a new video and then all of a sudden every single one that they've ever made before that feels really out of date. So if I were going to point the finger or try and get somebody on board, I would love it if you checked out, there's a video that's titled You Created This Video. That's a very recent one. And I think it reflects sort of the vibe I want to stick with going forward. For a little while there, I was doing kind of more instructional things. And while I still want to have room for that, I think the heart of this project is always going to be in the poetry of it, even if that isn't the kind of thing that normally penetrates the YouTube algorithm. So You Created This Video is the one that I would love to shout out and say, hop on board. It's a great time.
Now, as far as today's topic, I was really excited to see which ones you were discussing on that particular episode of yours. I mean, you really broke form, and it was a nice change of pace just seeing you vlog instead for once and diving into our normal comic discussions, only now to everyone. Also, I'm actually not that well read in the realms of manga, and I actually knew of two of the creators you discussed in that episode. And so we're kind of approaching both of them this time around as well. So today we're discussing two manga in particular. One I only discovered thanks to Duz's video, and that's Welcome Back Alice by Shuzo Oshimi. And it's one of the most personally challenging trans adjacent comics that I've read for the show so far. We'll be contrasting this with Goodbye Eri by Chainsaw Man's Tatsuki Fujimoto, a not so trans manga that I think pairs well with the other series, and it's honestly just my favorite one shot of the last few years.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Both of those stories, I have to say, I went out of my way to read Goodbye Eri and to catch up with you for this episode, and I absolutely loved it. I also, just a funny thing I noticed is we have a book with the title Goodbye, and then the following one, Welcome Back. And I just thought that was kind of a cute thing that happened.
Oh, yeah, that was half the reason I pulled it, but on revisiting your video, I remembered the other reason I wanted to bring it up, and we'll get there in a moment. But
for sure.
As far as the creative teams go, I know Shuzo Oshimi, for people that read trans and queer adjacent manga, like their name might be known to you, maybe in a more infamous way than famous, but what's your relationship to their past work, or how did you come to know them?
So I came to know them through their manga series Blood on the Tracks, which is something that is it is a very kind of intimate and like weirdly realistic horror series. It's about a young man and his mother, his like very protective mom, and she protects him from like a dangerous situation. And I don't want to spoil anything on this because it happens at the end of the first volume and it's kind of the hook for it. But she commits a crime. And it's sort of like their relationship evolves from there. And it becomes it's a very psychologically scary book. And now that is not why I picked up Goodbye Alice, but that is or Welcome Back Alice, but that is why I knew his name. So Welcome Back Alice, I think it popped up to me maybe when like the first volume had come out or something. I wish I remembered who. I would love to shout them out, but I'm pretty sure there was a YouTube video that was talking about, new transgressive things. And I had been personally reading like a lot of Japanese manga in the queer space. So I was something that I find really fascinating about different cultures is that you'll find trans people historically, everywhere that you look, pretty much until the Romans or the British show up, they're there, they're in the culture. And so every culture has a different relationship with transgender people. And it really feels like in the United States right now, our relationship, I think because our country is so like young, there's sort of a lack of like historical context that goes beyond like the last 100 or so years for people to connect to. And I know it's something that I feel some trouble with as a generally like Anglo blended American. There's a lack of connection that I feel to like my trans ancestry that I would really like to have access to. And all that is to say that reaching out into other cultures' media and seeing how they handle and think about gender diversity, representation, and sexuality in that same family is really powerful and interesting to me. So I was in a rabbit hole of reading some Japanese autobiographical manga about being queer and about being non-binary and trying to consume and take in this new and different perspective that is influenced by like modern Japanese culture. And so knowing that Oshimi was writing a book that had been recommended to me, I knew that there was a lot of space for it. He's a horror writer. So it was a morbid curiosity that kind of got me in the door. And that morbid curiosity, wow, I'm sure you'll agree with me, really sticks with the first several volumes of the manga where you really wonder, what are you trying to say? What do you want to say? And there's a lot of unease in that series. But it was absolutely addictive to me. And I really thought that coming from an Eastern perspective, while it's not going to jive and blend with sort of the Western, especially like American and European view on transgender people and gender nonconformity, it was a very unique and wholly it was a very spiritually present view. There's a moment of lucidity in that book that I think really shines through and really turned that into something that I felt like genuinely had spiritual value and became something I wanted to talk about in my video.
I know this is something that's been in their work elsewhere. I only was familiar with the creator because my best friend from high school, who may be coming up later in the show, had sent me a video by Keiko Cat about the incel to trans pipeline and how that's kind of explored in their previous manga, Inside Mari. And
Yeah.
go watch Keiko Cat's video, please, because like they really get into some of the writings and musings on gender from the creator. Uh, I am not someone who likes to speculate on the gender identity of people in the public sphere. I don't like when people try and say so and so is an egg, because I'm like, hey, what if that person sees that and that like knocks them back into the closet or makes them resentful to trans people because they're not an egg and they're just being themselves.
Right.
This is an exception.
Right.
A lot of I think actually every volume ends with one of their musings on gender, and they never like come out with a particular identity, but any trans femme person reading this comic will definitely feel a lot of the same things that Shuzo Oshimi is talking about. And yeah, I don't know what kind of roadblocks they have for gender healthcare access over in Japan, but it's very much like, girl, just try HRT. You got 2 or 3 months before the changes are that drastic. Just see how you feel, hun. Like, yeah, it's pretty significant, but I'm definitely interested to read more of their work after this. This is my first time actually diving into them, but it's a really quick read. Like when you had mentioned on your show, I think I just saw you hold up one book, so I thought like Goodbye Airy, it was just a single one-shot volume. Then I got worried when I saw it was 7 volumes. I thought there was no way I could like read that in time, but yeah, in like half a week I was done. Not because I was pushing myself, just because it's an addictive read. You'll breeze right through it. It's a lot of fun. And well, I don't know about fun, but it's a really addictive, exciting read.
Parts of it are fun. It is exciting. There you go. I think that's really, if I was going to pick a word, I think that's the one. I think Oshimi has really mastered the cliffhanger, and something that I think makes this work so well. Something about me is that I can be very sentimental about like the teenage years. For me, a lot of that is sort of like this feeling of like missed opportunity, like for being who I really felt like I was, or who I wanted to be, when I was in high school. I struggled a lot with like how I perceived myself, and the language really wasn't in the popular lexicon for me to come to any like conclusion or even be all that curious about it. Just people weren't really talking about it yet for me. I presently identify as a non-binary person and as a trans feminine non-binary person. And so when I was a really great example outside of this is the anime and manga series Tomi Can't Communicate, which is something that I'm really affectionate about. It's a great series. It just finished recently. And I wouldn't say that it is about, any trans issues, but it does feature a very positively portrayed transgender or non-binary character. And this character has this experience in high school that I'm incredibly envious of, because they're able to seamlessly transition from, the masculine and feminine spaces. And the way that they behave, this is the well-meaning rascal archetype, which is probably like, my favorite archetype in just about anything. It's what I strive to be, somebody who pushes buttons for everybody's emotional growth, and I know that comes through in a lot of my art. So this book, I was really curious about, because Shuzo is a horror author and they're creating a story about non-binary gender identity that takes place in high school, but that they're not going to pull any punches. They're comfortable showing whatever they want. And it's not going to be in this very cutesy, friendly slice of life manga like Tomi Can't Communicate is. And, you said exciting, and that really stuck with me, because that is such a big part of the book, right? Is it's about excitement. It is about like how it feels and what it means to be sexually aroused, or why we are, or the conflicts that we can face within our gender and sexual identities when our instinctual bodies react to certain stimuli. And while Kay, the non-binary character in this series, they're kind of all over the morality spectrum. I don't know if I could call them a well-meaning rascal, but there's still just that little hint of rascaliness in there, where it's like, it's the pressing buttons, it's the pushing boundaries and saying, why not? Why don't people do this? Why is this wrong? And so they're not getting any awards for, like respecting people's boundaries and, their space. But definitely they're a character that, for me, emotionally, spiritually, politically, I always find myself on the outside. I always kind of find myself on the edges of society. I never really quite fit in. And it's something to where a lot of that isn't necessarily fair. And because we've structured society in a way that makes sense and is honest and like compassionate, a lot of times it's because of all these kind of ridiculous barriers that we put up. And so I'm used to pressing buttons and saying, why do we do this? Why can't we do this? Why is this wrong? And that there was something in this book that really appealed to that. And it just got me excited. Every time I finished a volume, I was eagerly waiting for the next one. So that's a lot of how I feel about that one.
Yeah, and just some of those like upfront warnings about the book. The first volume of this, especially, I think is like where it feels the most egregious, since you don't really know what the book is doing yet, and that's when Kay seems like the least well-meaning. They just seems very forward and disrespectful of people's boundaries. So like, if you stopped before finishing the first volume or didn't try the second one going onward, I could understand someone stopping and thinking like, is this just femboy hentai or something? And then like, weirdly, by the end of it, I'm like, okay, you know what? Actually, I thought Kay was an asshole and like I hated them in volume 1. By the end of it, I'm like, I think everyone else kind of sucks and Kay is awesome. And weirdly, like they address some of those issues and come to understand themselves better, and everyone else seems to understand themselves better in the process. So like, it might seem jarring. I don't know if I'd say overly gratuitous, because like I've seen anime, I've seen manga, I've seen overly gratuitous. This is just not pulling punches, as you said.
Yeah, I think that's important. And it's funny because in my video, I did not give any sort of warnings, but I absolutely should have. It is gratuitous. It is like there's a lot of violation of like trust and boundaries, and there is, explicit nudity throughout. So thank you. That was good of you.
Now, in your video, you had described this as a painfully Japanese take on gender. And I was wondering if you could expound on that, since I don't have quite the same context or understanding. Like, what I do know, which is limited and coming from videos about video games and anime, so that's not the extent of the culture.
Right.
But like, I've heard it said that in Japan and elsewhere in the world, sometimes it's easier to be trans than it is to be gay in certain countries, like depending on how strict they are on like gender norms and expectations. So they're like, okay, you're just switching sides. Well, there's still people here that'll be assholes about it, but like, as long as you're sticking to the other side's rules, we're cool.
Yes.
And like that, I know that's something that does come up in this, of like, hey, even though this person's very femme presenting, that's not really what they want. That's just the next thing they can try, or the closest thing. So I'm curious, like, with more context, what does that painfully Japanese take on gender look like?
Yeah. So it is very interesting. This is something that I've read a lot about. So in Japan, like you were saying, they really, really value rule following, rule obeying, right? It's like everybody kind of, you fit into culture. And so exactly what you're saying, it's like being trans is one thing. It's like you're still fitting in, you're still trying to be something. Whereas being gay can be, be visually disruptive, seeing like two men holding hands or something like that. And I'm not going to say that like this has gotten a lot better, but that is like culturally disruptive to what you're used to seeing. Whereas there's less of this emphasis and focus on if you were to transition gender and fully absorb yourself and assimilate into the expectations that like public society has for you. So being somebody who is presenting as non-binary, or somebody who doesn't want to conform to a specific gender, which is very much, where I fall and a lot of other folks do, is visually dissonant. It's considered rebellious. And so historically, Japan has a few different categories of like gender deviation. Now, I'm missing the historical name for this, but there was a culture where like young boys would be like put into a slightly more feminine role, as they would basically like be the apprentices to like spiritualists in Japan. And there was a sexual aspect to that relationship. And it was such like a I don't know, like a cultural kink that female sex workers would actually dress as these young boys, because that was like, in the spirit of things, like that was a kinky fantasy or an excitement that some people had. And then the femboy archetype, which again, I'm missing it. It's such a fun word to say, but I don't have it in my head right now. But the femboy archetype has also existed as well, where it's like we're kind of having a conversation in the West right now about like femboys versus trans feminine people and like what it's okay to identify as. And those conversations happen inside and outside of queer communities. And in Japan, there's been sort of this like a femboy culture. I don't know if this has existed longer, but maybe within like the media's social sphere, as far as in things like art and manga and whatnot. And then there is the new half gender identity, which is a gender identity that is effectively like a trans feminine person, but they are considered something else. So you could make a comparison to like the Hydra in India or something like that. It's like they are a different thing, but they are, and so they're being influenced by Western ideology. And that's resulted in two big new movements in Japan right now, which are X-gender. And X-gender is basically the Japanese language for non-binary person. And that is something to where there's a manga about that I could recommend. It is titled X-gender. Don't have the author in my head, but that was something that I read that got me here. And also genderless fashion. So again, it is a fashion term, but it is people who are trying to present themselves without gender or with mixed gender traits through their fashion and their clothing, which I would argue is absolutely gender expression. And people who identify with the genderless fashion movement, it seems to be like an internally motivated process, although it might not explicitly or exclusively be so. So when I say like painfully Japanese, I'm thinking about how they value conformity and how a lot of people who fall outside of the norms feel very unwanted in their communities and culture. And in particular, that manga that I was talking about, X-Gender, it's a very, very sad read. There's another great one that's called My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness, which is about being a gay woman and feeling, again, very, very isolated and very like unwanted from society, even though the culture isn't particularly rude about these things. But it's something about the way that it is. And so in this book, in Welcome Back, Alice, when Kei first appears, especially if you're already familiar with Oshimi's work, it really appears that they are presenting to you like a villain or a monster, and the enemy is gender. The idea of gender and gender nonconformity is presented to the main character of this series as something that is totally incomprehensible, something that the main character Yo cannot get his head around. It's like, this was my best friend and now they're a total babe, but they don't identify as a woman and they totally want to touch me inappropriately against my wishes and, struggling with what society expects of you. And I think something that happens in Welcome Back, Alice, is that he gets what society expects from him. He gets to have the young man in high school, getting laid with the girl that he's had this huge crush on. And it's awful, and I know personally, I can strongly relate to that. I really, really connect with that. And it's not that it's just always awful, but it's the fact that when you're approaching a sexual experience from a space that you do not identify with, it can be, that's more the horror experience than anything intimate that happens with Kei.
I feel like there's so much to contrast with how it starts, where the characters are at the beginning with where it ends, and why the ending doesn't feel icky with like the redemption of any of these characters without a ton of redemptive acts, more just a lot of self-realization. If I wasn't out of practice, I might have done this up front, but I think we had a nice little Japanese culture discussion ahead of time. So could you give us like a rundown of the general plot of Welcome Back, Alice? Yeah, like going forward from my best friend's hot and back at my school now?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, let me just say, it is a pleasure to not have to worry about spoilers when talking about a piece of media I love. Ugh. Yeah. I just adore the opportunity.
So I guess consider that your spoiler warning, but I'm really
that's a spoiler warning.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't unpack this thing without
talking about. It's about the
about
journey.
Yes, it is. So okay, it is a 7-volume series, and it opens up with the main character Yo, and he had this best friend when he was a young person, and his best friend left town and then comes back and is back at his high school, and his best friend is like this totally rockin' mega hot babe. So this character is Kei, and they come back and they say, hey, I don't really feel like I'm a woman or a man. I don't want to be seen as either, but they are presenting very feminine throughout the story, which is something that a lot of non-binary people will go through. They will, and trans people as well. There'll be a large period where it's like you're exploring what you've never had access to before really figuring out what you're comfortable with. And so Yo goes through this crisis because Kei is clearly into him, and Kei is into him on a spiritual level, which is something else that I can identify with, where Kei is just like from the beginning, it's like, oh, our souls are connected. Like we're together, we're supposed to be together in some capacity. And there is this extreme like lack of jealousy in Kei that is really interesting because Kei is sort of pushing Yo to explore and like breach these boundaries throughout the series. And Yo at the same time has this crush on Mitani, who is a young lady with whom he's been, you know, attracted to for a really long time. And Mitani had a crush on Kei when they were young. And now Mitani is going through this struggle of her childhood crush being a rockin' hot babe who's like ditched gender and like says, oh, I'm not even a boy. And I think that that's a big theme in this book is what is a man? What is straightness? And Yo is experiencing firsthand through his mutual attraction to Mitani and through Kei that maybe it's not a really easy line to draw, that maybe it's not as clear as he thought it was. And there's very clearly an intense spiritual connection between Yo and Kei throughout the whole thing, which is really exemplified in the ending. The final moments of the book, they really crank that all the way up to 11. And that was something that, while I wish the series was longer, but I would have kept the ending the same. I just maybe would have written it a little bit differently. It's like my biggest qualm about the book is that the ending, you finish reading that whole last volume in like 5 minutes, and it just feels like there was maybe more to do. But I do like the way that they finish in focusing on these two characters' connection with each other and the love that they have for each other, which did not fit the generic mold. And another thing, too, that's a strong thing in this book is the inner child. They really focus a lot on how when we're children, you know, a lot of us don't feel particularly gendered until we reach the puberty ages or until somebody in our intimate life gives us that gender identity. But when we're young, a lot of us will play, you know, and we don't really think much about boys and girls, and you just feel like a child. And I know it's an experience for a lot of non-binary people that they want to feel like that again, and that's what they're looking for. And it's like before all this extra stuff was given to me that I didn't sign up for and I didn't want. And so in that, I think they do a very good job at exploring that without it being an age regression conversation. It's about feeling young. It's about feeling youthful. It's about feeling whole and disconnected from gendered societal expectations. So throughout the course of the series, Yo is juggling, you know, Kei and Mitani. Kei is very disrespectful of boundaries, but feels like they just know something that the MC does not and continues to push. Mitani, it just becomes quite abusive. And I think a lot of people, queer and no, may have found themselves in situations where another human being was using sex to control and manipulate them. I know that I certainly have. And I really sympathized a lot with Yo's journey through getting what he thinks that he wants, discovering that this can be a really painful, very manipulative, very harsh experience, even though society is saying this is normal, you know, and you should like this and you should want what's happening to you. And then finding peace and finding comfort in a queer partner where like those expectations don't exist. A very common persistent theme is that when Kei and Yo are alone, Kei is really saying it's just us. We're all that exists. We're all that matters. It's just you and me. It's always been you and me. And there's this like trust that develops and this like really pure openness that I think a lot of people in queer relationships can relate to when they leave the cishet world for the first time. And another space where this is exemplified is a scene that I absolutely love. And you got to tell me if this resonated with you as well. But when Anno, the character, the artist girl, wanted to draw Kei, and invited Kei over, and they have Kei strip so that they can draw them nude. And then Kei talks to her about how she feels about her body and about how, all of her insecurities. And Kei encourages Anno to take off her clothes as well. And there's this panel where they're both standing naked with each other, and there is zero sexual tension. There is zero, like none of that is in the air. It is just this very pure look. You know, you're beautiful, you're complete, you're whole, and look at me, touch me. I'm real, I'm here, I'm beautiful, I'm complete, and I'm whole. And there is something in that panel, I think this is like volume 6, that just really, really shook me and really made me feel extraordinarily comfortable with who I was and all of the dysphoric feelings that come from having like a masculine body in ways that you maybe don't identify with. Something that I've dealt with a lot personally is feeling like, I am still acceptable and I am still beautiful and I am still like, the standards and the things that are being thrust on me. It's okay for me to pursue how I want to present and how I want to look, but there's nothing about me that's wrong. And it's a gift to live in modern society where you can pursue things to change anything about yourself. And, I've done that too. But it's like all of it is an act of creation. You are participating in creating yourself. It wasn't just God did it, brushed his hands off and walked away. Like, you're missing the point if that's what you think, this is about.
I want to interject with this character of Ano, who we haven't really mentioned before. Both because, like, one, it's a really good depiction of like how Kay has grown at this point, like approaching this in a much more respectful and maybe reserved way. But
yes,
Ano is like the perfect depiction of that, like that the trans person that's only just beginning to realize they're trans, or that like there are options out there, and has no chill. Like, they meet Kay and they're immediately like, I need to draw you. I want to draw you. Like, they get in their way, and like Yo has to help Kay get away from them at first. But like it's then in like talking about them, they're like, that this whole done being a guy thing, but you're not a girl. Like, yeah, I've never really felt like I was a girl, but I don't think I'm a guy either. And like, they just need to see it. They need to know someone. They need to know it's an option. And like, they then both kind of chill out a bit, and like they're way less pushy about drawing them, and like they just kind of come to see each other and like see their own insecurities in one another, or more like they know they're both feeling the same kind of insecurity. And it has that like really beautiful depiction of like when two trans people meet, and it's like, I see these things in myself, about myself in you, and I can love myself more because of it. Even though there's not, like much of a romantic vibe between the two of them, there is just that like total acceptance. And like, I think with more time in the series, I'd really like to have seen more from Ano, and like how they grow, and like why they work with Mutiny. Because by the end, like Yo and Kay like are getting back together after like Yo almost self-mutilates, and they're in a hospital, touching reunion, and Mutiny's like, well, what am I supposed to do? And Ano is just like, I'll jump on this live grenade. I know we've barely talked, but we'll figure something out. And fast forward a few years, and I guess they're still probably like dating, or they just hang out. Maybe they're just pals. But that was the like, okay, I would like to see Ano help Mutiny understand herself and like actually work through her toxic traits, because I don't think she has. Like, they just kind of evolve, they come to a head, and thank God Yo like finally gets the self-confidence to bring it to a stop. But it's like, well, there's character growth left to go with Mutiny here, and like we're supposed to be okay with her still being in their lives, and so like I assume she kind of grows out of that. But yeah, I think that's the kind of thing that was missing if this just had like one more volume.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way. I think when I wrote in my Goodreads review about the final volume, which I gave a 3, by the way, I think I'd given most of the series a 4 until I got there. And again, I liked the ending, but it's exactly what you're saying, where it just felt like I just wanted the author to go further. And it might be some of that like internet egg pressure that you're talking about, but it really was just like, please do more, please say more, and a lot of people who read this were disappointed that it didn't end up as a straight horror. And I'm so grateful it didn't, because I did not want this to be trans Tomi. I really didn't want that. I wanted this to be like a really genuine like exploration. And I think that this could have been like an all-time great, if we had just spent a little bit more time with Mitani and with Ano, and maybe developing Kay and Yo's relationship. But something that I really do love about this is, I was saying earlier that I can romanticize high school, but the thing is that high school, like, for large parts, was a total fucking nightmare, especially for queer people. And so, like, this really captured, like, it's the everyone sucks here sort of vibe, to put it in Reddit terms. Like, everybody has some problems. Yo is going through some real intense internalized, maybe trans homophobia. Kei is just not being respectful of people's boundaries and is really feels like, they know something that Yo doesn't and just wants to push them in that direction, which I mean, they're right, but that doesn't justify it. And Mitani is doing the same thing where it's like exploring this, like, the feminine soft power that is popularized in media of like controlling a man's access to sex. And the way that she is controlling Yo through his wiener is, pretty severe. And it's really like, while it's easy if we put all these behaviors in a vacuum right now, culturally, it would be very easy to just like individually cancel any one of these human beings, if they were real world people. But the truth is that high school is very messy. Being a teenager is very messy. Being young is very hard. And people really do go through these things. And like the best people probably infringed on somebody's like space in high school or did something shitty or said something horribly manipulative. And that was something, when we're saying not pulling punches, it felt very, very real. It felt very much like, God, could you imagine, being in this situation? And my answer was, yeah, I really could imagine. I could imagine being any three of these characters, having the queer experience that I did when I was young. And I know that I've changed and I've grown. And so for me, it's kind of like when talking about problematic characters in manga and anime specifically, there's a lot of wiggle room because people are really used to archetypes that are like, say fan servicey or say like the on-screen pervert. Like these are very common tropes in like Japanese manga and anime. But to see it presented in a way that is not wholesome, not funny, just like very real, it felt extremely voyeuristic to me, is something that is a phrase I'd use to describe Welcome Back, Alice. It really feels like you're looking in and just kind of like, wow, this must be omniscience, for just the minds of these like 3 or 4 high schoolers.
I think one of the aspects of K that's important that like kind of balances out how forward they are in the beginning is that like they do become a safe space for Yo. They're always really understanding. They're never taking things out on him. They're like, if this is what you have to do to like get through it, okay. But like they're still there always in the end. And like even though things get pretty like literally steamy between the two when they have those like moments of reunion, I like the way that it usually cuts to like more of a moment of innocence or like, yeah, that glimpse of the spiritual gender or even just that like a time before we had gender. So it's not just like working up to a point of climax. It's more working toward a point of like full relaxation or, I guess letting go. And just like, I love that in all their intimate moments, it's not like, yeah, now I'm your girlfriend, Yo. It's no like, you don't have to be a boy either. And like realizing like, oh, I don't have to be a boy. I don't have to be a girl. And even though we don't see as much of an exploration in Yo's gender expression, like it is also one of those places like they just kind of needed someone to show them what was out there, that they didn't need to accept what is expected of a man is just like what's on them and feeling like a failure when you don't live up to that. And
hell yeah,
they don't really show too much of what Kay is going through as a queer person. Like there is Yo does save them from like a potential assault, but I think that's something I kind of would have liked to see is just some more depictions of like the bravery of Kay by like going back to this school and being like presumably the one person that's willing to present like this, working with the school to be allowed to wear the girls' uniform, and just like everything they're doing, living alone as a trans teenager.
Yeah, I very much agree with you. That is something about this book is I think as a, coming from the perspective of a horror author, I think that Oshimi, felt like they needed to present this story from Yo's perspective. And I think it's because really, honestly, that first volume, I don't know, I was maybe 2 or 3 volumes in before I was sure that like Kay wasn't like going to kill somebody, like I didn't know what they were going to do. And I was worried that it would become a bad feel, a bad taste, or, have like the psychotic trans character, trope. But that really wasn't what happened. But the tension definitely comes from the fact that you don't know that. And it does make it kind of a thriller read. And I think that's why a lot of people were let down with the ending is because that's just not what happens. It just doesn't become a scary thing. It just really is about one person reconciling, some internalized dysphoria and phobias. But I agree with you. I would have loved to see a similar story like this. And I really hope that we continue. I'm seeing a large influx in stories in Japan right now that are about like gender expression and identity. There's one called Not Your Idol, which is about a young idol performer who is assaulted, which unfortunately, I guess happens like all the time. And she like kind of transitions into being a boy, but it's about like not wanting to be a girl. And so again, it's like, I don't know, it's another Japanese take where it's like they're not using the same language as me. So I don't know exactly how to take it. And it is a love story where she falls in love with the male character. But it is like kind of, I'm seeing more of this. And also worth shouting out, just because I know that you don't normally discuss manga and anime, there is an amazing series called Stop Hibari-kun. And
I've heard of this one. Yeah.
it's very good. I have not read it all or anything, and it is dated, but I got to say that this is from like 70s, 80s. It's very, very early. And Hibari-kun is a trans woman. Kun is a masculine, like honorific, but it's a cute masculine honorific. You use kun to refer to like a cute boy or something like that. And it is important to say that in Japanese, these are not exclusive. It's like, it really is like vibes based, right? But the point is that Hibari is, she's like the daughter of a crime boss, and she can kind of do whatever she wants. And she's a trans woman, and that is, it is like a joke. It is kind of like the gimmick of the whole thing is that, she has this bodyguard who's supposed to be like protecting her and helping her. And it's like, oh, like that is kind of the gag over and over again. But it is very cute, and it's actually very wholesome, and it does come off as very well-meaning. And this is something that was syndicated on national television, in like the 1980s. So it really is like, I don't know, if you're interested in like large cultural contrasts, it's another really good example to think that like, okay, this is where we're at. This is how we were thinking about it. And it is a long shot from the open hostility and anger that comes through in like Western, European, and United States media that is not tailored to that like community in the first place. So I don't know, just something that I wanted to shout out. It's only tangentially related, but I can't imagine it coming up on a future episode anytime soon. So if you're listening in on this right now and you're interested in something a little more wholesome and a little less freaky deaky, that would be something I'd point you towards. Stop Hibari-kun.
Now, one thing I think is really important that we discuss in this is the afterwards in every volume of this series. Each one ends with either a written essay or sometimes like an autobiographical comic from the writer. And they're talking about like how comics like awakened their sexuality, but like kind of also informed it in a way. They're like, oh, I'm supposed to like these girls in my boys comic magazine. And like, he talks about masturbation a lot.
He sure does.
And I guess, disclaimer, I'm using he, him pronouns because that's what they have said they use. So until I learn otherwise, that's what we're going with. Until she learns otherwise, that's what we're going with. But yeah, like, and they're describing things to a T of what the trans experience is like, or just like this sadness about like not, like, I don't just want to be a woman. I want to start life over as a woman. And like, am I just wanting to, like, is the grass greener on the other side? Or like, what am I working towards here? And so it's not just like speculation at like what the writer is feeling. It's stated very clearly. And like, he's talking about not healthy behaviors that were instilled in him, just like how he grew up and had this terrible image of what he needed to be like as a boy, and how he's kept failing at being that boy. And with how beautifully I think this series ends, at least where the characters leave off, it kind of makes me sad that like this writer isn't leaving off in a place of like, and in the process of writing this, I've realized this about myself, or like we see maybe something like what he wished would happen. But yeah, like I want them to go a little step further. Like, can we explore this in our own lives and not just in our own comics?
Yeah. I had the same thought. I think that if you presented Shuzo Oshimi with the famous red button, where it's, you hit this button and you get $1 million, but there's a 1 in 100 chance that you'll turn into a girl, right? Like, and then the joke is that you get all these people mashing the button. I think Shuzo would probably hit the button. And again, it's like, I don't want to be problematic in that, but it's exactly what you just said, is that like it is word for word written out on the page for you. It's like, this is how I feel, this is what I think, this is what's going on. And it's exactly what you're saying. It's like, okay, like there's one more step. It's like, I want you to be happy. I would love to hear like what you could write about if you were like happy. I think that there's an opportunity, and no matter what that is, again, too, it doesn't just mean that you're a woman. You know what I mean? It could mean that, like, yeah, maybe you're non-binary, like the character you wrote, or maybe you're ex-gender, or maybe you feel comfort expressing yourself with genderless fashion, or who knows what it is. But the idea is again, it's like, there's this pressure to not break the mold and to not stick out so much. And I think there's additional pressure. I think a lot about like in American culture, passing can be a matter of safety for a lot of transgender women, where it's like it's maybe in a different world you'd be comfortable with like leaving a certain foot in the masculine, or accessing those masculine traits in your fashion or presentation. But then in the Western world, it's like we would really rather just not be observed, and would really rather not be perceived as like gender nonconforming or transgender, as a matter of like safety, because trans people are being used as this like terrible political like straw man right now. And it's like, I could go on about that forever, but I don't want to derail us. But the point is that when you think about that in a culture that really values conformity, like even more than we're used to, that really is focused on that, I can see how it's quite the challenge to, like you were saying, like, oh, if you were to start estrogen for a little bit before anything seriously happens, see how it feels. It's like, there's this feeling that it's like, I know for myself personally, as I was reconciling all of this, was, it seemed like any meaningful transition towards being more feminine presenting was inaccessible, because there was a lot of like 0 to 100 black and white thinking going on. There's the idea of like, oh, I wouldn't be able to afford this surgery, or I wouldn't be able to like afford this hair removal thing, or I can't make myself shorter, or like, it's things like that. And then, if you just poke at it a little bit, you might find that like there's some comfort to be had that isn't black and white, or that isn't 0 to 100. And I think it's really hard to get out of those absolute ideas, maybe in that culture to some respect. But also, Shuzo Oshimi is an artist, and the artist is the modern day shaman, I think, across the world. The artist is allowed to speak in terms of like muse and angels, and like, we accept David Bowie and we accepted Prince. And if they were just a few decades later, they would be using different pronouns or neo-pronouns or something, and so it really is like, another great example is Chappell Roan, is like maybe the most popular pop musician in the world right now. And her entire identity is built on like queerness and drag and like, solidarity with transgender women. And it's like, so artists do have this space where they're allowed to kind of like blur the lines a little bit. It's like, it's the one class of people that we hand that stick to. And I don't know. I think I'd really like to see that too. I can't wait to read the next Oshimi book and see if it has anything to do with gender. I'll be on board. I'm very curious where they go from here.
Circling back to like his comic Sexual Awakening, I was up late last night reading, and something weirdly pertinent came up. Are you familiar with Frederick Wortham and Seduction of the Innocent? This was the book that caused like the Comics Code Authority and like the mass censorship in the 50s and 60s of comics.
Yeah, there was like a great website about, it was Seductions of the Innocent, like way back in the 2000s, and it was all edits of like old Batman panels and stuff. So you're connecting me with like my 12-year-old self right now. There it is. Okay.
So no, I was reading Mutants and Mystics by Jeff Kripal, which awesome book about like weird paranormal experiences of sci-fi and comic writers. If you like Grant Morrison, Alan Moore stuff, read this. If you read Grant Morrison's Super God, this is like the slightly more or significantly more scholarly text that takes that to the next level. I'm loving it so far. And he just got to the point of discussing Frederick Wortham and being pretty sympathetic and pointing out that Frederick Wortham actually made some good points. And one of them kind of pertains to this, because there was like very sexual material in comics at the time, and ones that like still seem marketed toward kids. And like one of his points is that comic books stimulate children sexually. And this is a sexual arousal which amounts to seductions. And like comes to the conclusion that comic books play an active causal role in juvenile delinquency and sexual pathology. They are temptations and seductions into real world violence and inappropriate sexual fantasies and acts, including and especially homosexuality. So, like, he takes it into the realm of getting really homophobic and calling Batman and Wonder Woman like gay role models for characters. But, like, here we are looking at someone who was raised in a different comics culture and talking about how comics awoke his sexuality and, like, in ways
Right.
that he now feels are very unhealthy. And, like, Frederick Wortham mostly sucks. I mean, I'm not gonna say like, yeah, go read the classic homophobe that like ruined comics for a while. But he was also calling out how wildly racist, sexist, and just like the very outdated stereotypes people would see in comics, which like, guys, he was writing in the 50s. Look at comics in the 40s and 50s and tell me they weren't wildly racist. Like Captain America is drawing like the most caricaturized, awful racial depictions of people. And so like Guy had some decent points. There is definitely that sexual connection, and like it is one of those things of I think it's way easier for parents to miss what kids are reading, both in comics and in novels for sure too. Like you can always catch what they're looking at on TV or on a video game or laptop screen. But like I read Mark Millar's Wanted when I was like 11 or 12. Probably too young for that, but it blew my mind and I loved it. And I thought I would never I couldn't go back to Marvel Comics until I found out Mark Millar wrote Marvel Comics that I thought were awesome as a 12-year-old. Uh, but like, yeah, when kids back then are reading like hundreds of comics in a year potentially, like there's all kinds of stuff you could miss. So it sucks that it came from a homophobe, but might be for the best that we got people looking into what's in these books. And yeah, I think that's something across time, parents might want to pay attention to what your kids are reading. There's a lot of stuff makes it into school libraries you wouldn't expect.
That's true. I read Art Spiegelman's Mouse when I was 7 years old. And that's, I don't know, like, I'm glad I did. It forever changed me. It totally turned me into like a cartoonist and like somebody who was politically aware, somebody who was politically logged in at 7 years old, But yeah, maybe it shouldn't have been in my elementary school library. Like, I'm not a book banner. I'm definitely more in favor of like more. I don't know. I enjoy controversial things, and I don't know. I kind of think it was neat. I think most people kind of have turned away from that, but regardless, I'm not going to act like that was appropriate reading material for me at the time.
Any final thoughts on Welcome Back, Alice, before we move on to Goodbye, Aerie?
Well, I just want to recommend to anybody, I know that we went ahead and spoiled it for you here, but I do think that it's worth reading if any of this jumped out at you. It's worth checking out. I think it is a very evocative and interesting work. And one thing that we didn't really talk about a whole ton was the very, very ending of it. And I think the ending is very experiential, but it is something to where like it's a theme that I come back to a lot in my work, and something that I want to talk about more is the idea of spiritual gender. And while there aren't any large declarations about the anima or the animus in Welcome Back, Alice, there is very much, it's a piece of work where it frames gender as a spiritual experience. And personally, that's how I see and interact with gender. But I think it is maybe one of the less popular like means of like thinking about and operating with gender in comparison to either viewing it as like a strictly scientific biological thing, like the right is pushing right now, or is it a Judith Butler style, like total fabrication and performative like framework that we've socially put on ourselves? But I fall into the camp of like, I do believe in femininity and masculinity. And I do believe that it is like kind of part of everyone's like spiritual work to explore those things. And that doesn't mean changing your identity or your expression, but like, we have such a really ugly thing going on where like, I'm sure you can relate, probably most listeners to, when you're a kid, being a tomboy is cool and easy and normal and like not a big deal. There's no equivalent for being like a young man who's like, who wants to explore, that's just called like being queer or having, poof-like tendencies. It's not really seen as a thing that like we celebrate or understand. It's like women are celebrated for wanting to be like men, and men are punished for wanting to be like women. And I really think that, to me, it's like, I believe that these things do exist, that femininity and masculinity are real, and that there is like a personal reconciliation that everybody, you owe yourself to do some sort of exploration with and understanding. emotionally and spiritually, how you resonate with these different parts of yourself, so as to not create a Jungian shadow, that haunts you throughout your life and turns you into one of these like mega pastors who ends up giving in to their sinful urges in a Motel 6. I really think that there's a lot to be said there. And the way that Welcome Back, Alice ends is like, hell yeah, brother. This is spiritual. This is something that is like, closeness, love, orgasms, gender, presentation, being you. Like all of that is part of the spiritual path. And again, I don't know if Oshimi really feels that way or has that going on. I couldn't speak to their spiritual beliefs, but that is why it ended up on my list. And that is like, if I were to put a bow on exactly what that series means to me, that would be something that couldn't go unsaid.
Now, in your video, you would ask the audience for manga that you have found to be spiritually moving to you, or like, what do we see amazing beauty in, or like in cathedrals everywhere for those with eyes to see them.
Yeah.
That's what made me think of Goodbye Airy more than just the clever wordplay of a welcome and a goodbye. But yeah, beautiful, beautiful book. Like, I think the thesis of it is wrapped up in one quote that reads, creation is all about getting into the audience's problems to make them laugh and cry, right? Well, it wouldn't be fair if creators didn't get hurt too, would it? And to give people a quick synopsis of like what Goodbye Airy is, it's about a young boy who his mom gives him a smartphone and tells him to record like every moment of her life because she's dying and she wants everything to be captured up to the moment of her death. And like in a really messed up way, asks her son, who's like 12, to record her death. He then turns this into a movie, and this is all in the opening pages, and screens it at like his class fair. And he makes the ending a little weird. Like it's all in there. And then instead of going to film his mom's death, he runs away from the hospital, and then the hospital explodes in a fake special effect. And the audience is just kind of silent, and then they burst out laughing. Everyone's telling him this sucks. Kids are like, hey, my mom died last year. Like, I can't forgive you for making something like this and making a joke out of it. And like, he almost decides to take his own life because he can't handle this. And then he meets Eri, an upperclassman who actually loved what he made, but like could tell, yeah, it's amateurish, but like I've never seen something like this. Like that ending was actually beautiful to me because it's so weird and out there. And they proceed to watch movies together every day. She shows him like literally at least 3 a day and is going on this mission of like, I want your next film to be great. I want to make that amazing. And eventually he starts making an autobiographical film about his experience with Eri, though depicting her as a vampire. And he once again comes to that situation of like needing to record someone in the moment of their death and seeing how he goes with that and like how obsessed with this project he becomes, and just how like this movie he's spent years of his life making now, like he's spending like decades now editing it, and it's just never quite perfect. But yeah, just like this sticks with him, and like it's almost a form of mourning his friend. But it's a beautiful story about like expressing yourself in art, being vulnerable, or like the vulnerability of expressing yourself in art, putting yourself out there, and what happens when it goes poorly, and like the lessons to be learned when that happens.
Yeah, it was a beautiful piece of work. It was something that I was really, really surprised by. Being familiar with the author's other main work, which is Chainsaw Man, to something else that I shouted out in my video because Chainsaw Man has a lot of spiritual depth to it. I really like, I was kind of floored. I could really see how this connected to some of the deeper themes that happen in later Chainsaw Man. And, first of all, so like well put together just from like a scripting standpoint, right? Like it is, you're being jerked around just enough, I think is something that I really thought a lot, is that, it's like, you don't quite know what's real and what's not because you're seeing everything through the film lens. And they have that kind of swerve where they show the other footage of his mom that he didn't put in the video, where she's like kind of a huge dick. And it was like, that was really, really powerful. It was such a great controlled way of controlling information for the audience through an unexpected medium. And so the writer nerd in me was thrilled. I really thought that it was really fantastically put together. And even as you come into Eri's tragedy, you're not really sure if what you're getting is being presented honestly or not. And it just made it something to where like it helps. It's not broken up into chapters, but I read it in two sittings. Because the first sitting was a sleepy sitting, but then as soon as I picked it up the next day, I couldn't put it down because I just had to know. But it was quite powerful because it was such a meta narrative, because it's a series that is very carefully choosing and curating how to present information to the audience about the fact that a creator and a writer and an artist and a director does exactly that and is doing exactly that in the pages of the book. So, again, I love meta stuff. I'm sure you do too. We're both Grant Morrison fans, so meta is like the name of the game. But I just thought that was so impressive. And, the piece of work that the main character is putting together, there was the perfect kind of like pinch of humor. And that line that his dad said about how you always have to put a bit of fantasy into everything was such like a masterful piece of dialogue in there, because it really like something that I love is when fiction catches you off guard with a fantasy twist, where it's like you just didn't expect that. And it's like, oh, there is like some amount of magic in this world. And so the character's propensity, it was the first explosion. It was making Eri a vampire in the story, and then there's the big twist at the very end where it's like, there's these little pinches of fantasy that make this story, it really elevates it. It really makes it something even more beautiful and more expressive of the creator's like intentions. And it just felt like a very revealing, beautiful, powerful piece of work. I could see why that resonated with you. And I couldn't thank you enough for the recommendation. I really enjoyed it so much. I'm glad I bought a physical copy. Can lend it to people now.
Yeah, this is one so Chainsaw Man is my favorite manga. It's what got me into manga. Like my first podcast, Comically Confused, my best friend had me read it, and I all of a sudden was like, I've been reading the wrong comics medium all my life. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I read Goodbye Eri when it was just on the Shonen Jump app, and like was eagerly waiting for it to get a physical release because I wanted to own it. Also, my girlfriend's name is Eri, so like kind of fun tie-in, and that's something I want to get into in a minute. But yeah, I love what you were talking about with like how this kind of jerks around the viewer. Like it plays with the comic book medium and also kind of the film medium at the same time. So you're never really sure if what you're seeing is part of a film or what's actually happening. Like there's a moment where they're talking to the main character's father, and like he explodes at Eri and is like, get out of my house. I don't like the influence you're having on my kid. And then like sits down and he's like, how is that? And like that was a take in the movie. Yeah. And there's other moments that too. Like by the end of it, you're not quite sure. Like, was Eri a dying vampire? Like, was the premise of like, yeah, she's hundreds and hundreds of years old, but now she's dying and like trying to make the most or like decide how she'll be remembered. And I love that theme with the storytelling of like, you have the power to decide for yourself how you'll remember someone.
Yeah.
And when you spend your life or spend your adult life like surrounded by creators and having some idea that they kind of choose how people will remember you or how you'll be remembered or how you'll be remembered to them. And that just hits a really deep place because like I now have friends that I'll never see again. And like I now know that the only place they're going to live is in their influences in my comics and other creative works. So like that's a incredibly huge burden for a writer to bear or any kind of creator. But this book is all about how you can wash away all of someone's worst aspects, this abusive mother and like forcing her kid to do this and thinking so little of them, or Eri being, according to her friends, kind of a bitch, but now they remember her as this amazing person, or like
with glasses and a retainer.
Yeah. Like totally sanitized. So like I know a couple people that it's like I want people to remember the things that I loved about this person and not the things that others might remember the person themselves for. And
yeah,
it just really hit me hard, and like it's a different experience every time I read it now. It's especially it really tugs at the heartstrings right now because I'm in a situation where this girlfriend of mine, Eri, who in many ways is a lot like the main character, or her depiction in the movie, I should say at least. She's a little bit timeless. She's older than me, but looks much younger. She's a huge film buff and has shown me movies I never would have seen or would have heard of on my own that really expanded like my idea of creativity. Um, we were friends with a filmmaker when we first started dating, and she helped them like getting their film moving and writing that, and like just had this all these parallels. So like in my first months of dating her, I find this comic, I'm like, oh my God, this is about you. Now I'm reading it, and in a couple of weeks she's going to be moving out of my house because we live in the first state in the country that decided to remove civil rights protections from trans people. I did not expect that to be the case since we were one of the first to legalize gay marriage, but now it looks like over the next year or two, I will be fleeing persecution from the state I've lived in my entire life. And my girlfriend is being transferred away because her job is like, hey, you're working in department stores and stuff. As a trans person in a state where you don't have rights, that's a huge liability. We have to get you out of there. And so while like we're going to stay together and I'm going to do everything I can to move where she's going, that's a huge undertaking. And that's time and space that's being put between us. And we're going to grow into different people during that time and like have to rediscover each other. And like literally the forces of the US government are getting in the way of our relationship. So I'm now reading this comic when I know my time with the most important person in my life is increasingly limited. And like now choosing what our relationship looks like going from here, where it's not, I see you every day. We eat a dinner together. We spend some time together every night. It's like, what text conversations do we have? What ideas do I get to share with you? Like, what are our interactions? And it's not even just choosing how you remember someone, it's choosing what your much more limited relationship looks like with the few interactions you get to have now. Um, so like there's a lot to unpack here, and like it hits a lot different. I'm sure I'll revisit this in a few years with other life events as they come, and I know this is going to feel different every time I read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of went on a tangent there, but that was also part of the reason I wanted to read this, since I know like it's about letting go and learning how to channel the most difficult moments in your life into art, and how that can paint a better picture and also give a level of immortality to these people or shape the way they're remembered. And I think there's immense beauty in that. And I feel like it's something that every creator should strive to do with every difficult and beautiful thing they live through.
Yeah. I appreciated your tangent. That was very personal and very like powerful. And, you actually made just like a brilliant point, because in Goodbye Eri, Fujimoto gives that power to the reader, right? Because at the very end, things aren't really very clear. You're allowed to decide, did he finish the movie and this is his twist? Or maybe Eri really is a vampire? Or like you're allowed to make that decision for yourself. Did he go crazy? Like, and a lot of people don't like that in film, but that was really like, it was lampshading, right? For this whole idea. It was really like, this is what it's about. How are you going to choose to remember Goodbye Eri as a series, as a comic, as a manga? And, I think it really says a lot that you've come back to this series multiple times and walked away with a different impression. And the point that you made about being able to like curate how people are remembered, it's something I think about a lot, especially in terms of like, I guess, I hate to say it out loud, but in regards to like cancel culture, it's like the way that we can like mythologize people because we have a perfect idea of like who they were. But then if you really knew everything that they did, it's like actually everybody's like really complicated. And so I'll see like when David Bowie died, there was a lot of discourse on the internet about like, did you know that he like slept with these like 14-year-olds or whatever? And it's like, there's no, what do you do with that information? It's kind of, is that how we're going to remember him? Or is that like, does that impact how you perceive his music? Does that change or diminish like the positive things that he did? And it's really like, nobody likes that conversation because it's not clean. And in Goodbye Eri, when we're talking about his mom, it's like, oh, what a beautiful thing. You're documenting your mom, and it's like, here's my mom, and my dad's sad, and like, look, I'm doing this thing, and it's, she loves me. And then you get all that extra footage that's like, oh, actually, she was a huge asshole, and she didn't like me, and she was putting all this pressure on me that she shouldn't have. And it's like, both of those people exist in a Neon Genesis Evangelion sort of way, right? It's like, both of those characters exist. Those are two different, this Yuta's moms. and everybody gets to be that, whether we're talking about like Gandhi and his sleeping with underage people, or we're talking about Martin Luther King and like, I don't know, did he beat up his wife? I think that's discourse. I don't know. But it's like there are these different versions, and how you choose to remember them and how you choose to curate the image. It's like you're creating, or you are participating in the creation of a whole nother individual. And the person that you are to the people in your life is different for each one of those people. And when you were talking about how there are people that you don't talk to anymore, there are people that I don't talk to anymore. And I exist to them as like an inaccurate portrait of who I am. That's not me. It's like aspects of who I was and aspects of how they interpreted me. And, and it's just kind of a mess. It's not really, you can't ever truly know somebody else's heart because you can't experience them directly. And I think that Goodbye Eri was like really, really, really driving that point home. It's like you don't really, the way that we perceive and consider and think about people is like, it's only an aspect, and it's just as much informed by you as it is informed by their behavior. And I think that that part of the conversation could extend to the characters in Welcome Back, Alice, where each of these characters had these very different interactions with each other. And the way that one character saw one would be different than how the other character saw them. And, especially when you're in relationships and you see the worst thing about somebody and I don't know, it's a very powerful concept. And I think that it was great execution in Goodbye Eri, that it can be such a short, fast read and give all of these ideas, and give so much to pontificate on and so much to consider. And we're not sitting here saying, oh, it felt like it was incomplete, or it felt like it was unfinished, or it felt like I didn't like the ending because I didn't understand it. Or it's like none of that's in the conversation. It's like this was a brilliant, provocative, thought-provoking piece of work that like can have it could be a real Rorschach test on whoever reads it. I would love to send this to a friend and say, well, what do you think? What's your impression? What do you think happened? Who does this make you think about? A great choice for this conversation.
I like how both of these manga explore love in different forms, healthy and unhealthy in some regards. But
yeah,
I think the main thing that both are working toward fall into like the two different categories I like to put, like romantic and platonic love, meaning either can fall into either category of like, there's the love of like feeling like another person wholly understands you, or just feeling seen and understood by another person. And then there's seeing yourself in another person and knowing that you can be loved and loving yourself more because of it, because you see yourselves in them.
Yeah.
And like the person who first informed me about the creator of Welcome Back, Alice, like they're my best friend from high school. We share everything down to a dead name. And like, it was very much like when we met, like, oh, like we're wildly similar and like have just stayed in touch all these years. And like, it's been a situation of where we felt like our life paths could have gone either way. Like we could have lived each other's lives. And I'd always had this worry, like, since they're still in our hometown area, like I knew I could transition because like I was in the much more queer friendly part of my state, and they still have to face like a lot of the same assholes that may or may not have made high school experiences a nightmare.
Right.
And so like thinking like, okay, I've done a lot of stuff I'm super proud of. I like what my life looks like now, but I don't know if I could have transitioned if I was back there. But having this person that I see myself in, like that has gone through and transitioned in spite of like a bunch of assholes and not a bunch of other trans people to find community with in these hometowns. I'm like, okay, like if they're strong enough to do that, I know I could have done that as well. And like, just, yeah, having that kind of connection that like, oh, okay, this person's like me and they're so likable and lovable and they're amazing. And yeah, there's a reason that they're like one of the small handful of people from high school I stay in contact with. On the other side, I've very much mentioned Eri and why the manga Goodbye Eri means so much to me. And for her, it's like my first time being a writer that gets to date another writer. And thankfully, we're mostly in different mediums. So it's like very encouraging and like very outside perspectives, but like not the same thing. Not like, oh, I also love comics or I also love Power Rangers or anything like that. Just very indulging, seeing what I love about these things, seeing what she loves about classic poetry and old literature, translations, French films, and like knowing that this person gets my mind, or like I can share a story idea and they'll like be able to help me develop that without like taking that into another direction. Or just like knowing this person is going to know how I'm going to feel about something. And like that level of feeling understood is something that you don't necessarily feel like you'll ever get when you like, whenever you have to mourn the loss of a connection, whether it's romantic or platonic. Like you might see yourself in another person again, maybe in the same ways, maybe not, but like it's hard to say if anyone will ever understand you in the same way that a particular person in your life did.
Yeah, it'll always be different.
Mm.
Yeah.
Um, I need to steer this conversation to some happier places. And since this is like our first real manga published in Japan by like a mangaka that I've discussed on the show, and it's one that like it's not for everyone.
Right.
So you are clearly very knowledgeable and literate in trans adjacent manga. So do you have a favorite or most recommended manga that's like an easier one to suggest, or one that like you won't be looking over your shoulder if you have to read it in public?
No. What a funny way of putting that question. So yeah, I definitely, there are other like trans adjacent manga that I can recommend, but there'd still be quite over the shoulder sorts of issues. I mentioned earlier X gender, and you know what? I actually have it like probably within arm's length right now. I'm going to grab it so that I can get you an author's name. Okay, I have X Gender by Asuka Miyazaki. And Asuka Miyazaki is a mangaka who identifies as non-binary, or at least the Japanese equivalent of being non-binary. And this is an autobiographical comic where they're really like intimately discussing Japanese queer culture, what it's like to date in the community, how they still feel kind of like excluded from some of the queer people, the struggles of like learning things through the internet and through Western culture that they identify with. And but it's also just really quite sad. The author is very depressed. The author is having a really bad time. It's something that again, I could also recommend My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness and My Solo Exchange Diary, which are written by Nagata Kabi. And while those had to do with gender too, and while the author does not quite come to like this explicit conclusion, they're also dealing a lot with neurodivergence and with like not fitting into culture and not being like attracted to the people they're supposed to be in the context they're supposed to be. And again, extraordinarily depressing, very sad. And both of these series are somewhat explicit. They're kind of cartoony. So it's not quite in the same way where there's like a lot of bodily fluids and like Welcome Back, Alice. There's less of that. But it is, I really hate to say that I haven't really read like I'm trans and my life is great manga yet. And maybe it's out there, but these are ones that have been kind of recommended as queer manga to me. If I wanted to recommend something that is queer, comfortable, safe, and maybe doesn't necessarily have to do like with gender, but is something that still meant a lot to me as a trans feminine and non-binary person, I really lean a lot towards like a lot of like the really high quality Yuri manga that's out there, which is, girls love. Just because there's a lot of like, I don't know, there's a lot of queerness in that space that I personally identify with. And so that this is not like a global recommendation just based on the fact of queerness. But if you do want something a little bit more lighthearted, a little bit more sweet and still like queer and kind of discussing queer issues as like acceptable, fun quirks, I have a couple. Give me 1 second. Okay. Our Wonderful Days by Surezure Biori is a very easy 3-volume. It takes place kind of like in the suburbs, like a more rural sort of Japan. It's not like a big Tokyo thing. And it's just sweet. It's just nice. It's just kind. And it's kind of like, it's about these 4 girls who just like live in sort of a non-traditional romantic context, and they live kind of away from society, and they are just allowed to be themselves. And while it doesn't go to any sort of super spiritual depth, it really gave me like the socialist trans girl polycule vibe, but with the rural Japanese vibes instead. And it was just so cute. And it's fiction, so it's happy. And another one, this is on hiatus right now. It's by the author Ning Yao, but it is called School Zone Girls. And it is another like high school girls love romance. But it is just ridiculously quirky and fun and like lighthearted and nice. So those are, my queer ones. Unfortunately, they're sad recommendations, and I hate to say it, but in the realm of like queer fiction, that's where some of my energy is too. And those are more lighthearted, be more fun reads.
Honestly, I'm just glad you had options that weren't Ouran High School Host Club or Ranma One Half.
Yes, I can do
And
that. Yeah.
yeah, you gave some good ones up front though too. Like I think Stop Tabari-kun is definitely worth a look.
Yes, definitely.
Especially for historical context. One I'm not very far into it, but I am enjoying it. Is Princess Knight by Osamu Tezuka? Is that the creator of Astro Boy?
Tezuka, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, super significant manga for many reasons. Like it's basically the first serialized comic that was for girls. It also is hella non-binary. Like literally the person has like the heart of a boy and the heart of a girl, and like she's presented as a knight but is secretly a princess, and like having to balance that. And so like real early queer representation. Yeah, there's definitely going to be some problematic stuff in there because it's like one of the first manga.
Right.
But from what I've read so far, it's very enjoyable. I love how well old manga holds up. Frankly, I've just been looking for someone to dive into this big tome of manga with me to like do a discussion episode at some point. But yeah, I really like that one. And while I have not read much Ranma One Half, something I'm doing this August is going to be like a Ranma roundtable full of other trans creators that had Ranma as formative media or who are really into maybe the newer anime that just came out.
Yeah.
So I just want to throw this out there to any other creators that might be listening. If you'd like to be involved in this Ranma roundtable, it's going to be recorded in August just for the sake of the schedule of some of the folk that have already agreed. But I know that like almost every cool trans anime or manga YouTuber has mentioned Ranma at some point. So I'm trying to assemble a team and just really dive into this with people who grew up with it, since I did not, and I have limited time to read manga or watch anime. I'll still check it out, but I want to get thoughts from people that like this really meant something or was like what they had as far as any kind of trans representation in their media growing up.
That's awesome. Then it reminded me of one last one that kind of falls in that category that's kind of ubiquitous. And I would just be remiss if I didn't mention Magical Girl Utena. I don't remember the author. If you're going to pursue this, go for the anime, just because it introduces some great colors and some great music. But it is very, very queer and gender bendy. And it's another one that, like, I think Utena might be late 80s, early 90s, kind of around there. But that is a very peak gender bent series that has a lot of like anima and animus going on. So it's not one that I finished quite myself, but it's as ubiquitous as Ranma, I think, is for a lot of people. But it's like an action oriented thing. Well, I guess Ranma is too, but anyway, I know I'd get in trouble with somebody if I didn't say that one.
Des, I really can't thank you enough for coming on today and for introducing me to Welcome Back, Alice, and really just all your videos in general. Before we do our sign off, where can our viewers find you? Anything you want to plug before we go?
Yeah. Yes. So thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to finally be on here. You're always so great to talk to. So I've really been looking forward to this for a long time. So again, thank you very much. And yes, so you can find me. I'm youtube.com/@Amdrag, AMDRAG, short for American Drag for spiritual reasons. Other stuff that I'm working on right now, if you're interested, I do have a postcard club that I do through my Patreon where I send folks postcards and physical media, and I always write little personal notes and whatnot. And it's just a fun way of like having a small community and kind of enjoying physical, mailable media, which is just something that I have a fondness for. I'm a big retro person. So if you're curious about that, check me out, patreon.com/American Dragon. And also keep your eyes out maybe on my community page or on my official Discord, which we can link somewhere around these parts. I am in the process of putting together a gaming podcast with a couple of other YouTube creators. So it is called A2B Perspectives Gaming, where we're talking about video games and philosophy a little bit. So I'm not sure exactly when that's going to launch, especially in relation to this episode. But it's something that I'm filming with some YouTube buddies of mine, creators Two Dens and Beyond Brainwaves. So just got to give a shout out to my pod bros and Appreciate y'all and appreciate you. Tommy, thank you so much for having me around.
Yeah, no problem at all. If the listeners at home have requests or recommendations for comics or creators you'd like us to cover in the future, you can send them our way on social media. You can find us on the Transcending Comics Instagram and Facebook page, preferably not Twitter as Transcending Comics. You can find me on Blue Sky as @TommyTrimbath, or you can email us at transcendingcomics@gmail.com. We'd like to thank you for giving our podcast a chance and give a special shout out to Ray Day Parade for designing our logo. Our intro and outro music is A Little Soul and You've Been Starring by Carlson. Check out their new single on Spotify, iTunes, and other music platforms. Join us again next week as we continue transcending boundaries and exploring the colorful world of trans, non-binary, and genderqueer representation in comic books of all kinds. As the curtains fall on this episode of Transcending Comics, remember the comics have the power to inspire change in countless worlds, including our own. Keep reading, keep writing, and keep transcending.